Welcome to Main Street Mavericks, celebrating conversations with exceptional Main Street businesses who serve friends and neighbors in your community. Here's your host, Joel Helfer.
Good afternoon. This is Joel Helfer, Main Street Mavericks Radio, with another episode. And today we have a very special episode. Our guest is Richard Lowe, Jr. Richard was vice president for two computer companies and director of computer operations for Trader Joe's for 20 years. He was responsible for computer security at major corporations for 35 years, and then he retired because he had an itch to become a freelance writer, a best-selling author, and a professional ghostwriter. He wrote two books. One was titled Safe Computing is like safe sex, and Real World Survival Tips and Survival Guide. He also is a photographer, and he photographed the Tournament of Roses parade in Pasadena, California for many years. Richard, welcome to the show. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I understand one of your passions is how to help people with LinkedIn. Could you tell us a little bit about the best ways to promote yourself on LinkedIn and get more qualified leads?
Well, I think the first and most simple thing that a lot of people neglect is to actually create a LinkedIn profile, and then fill it in with the appropriate data about you. And the thing to remember about LinkedIn is it's about you, not so much about your company or your products. It's not a sales platform. It's more of a branding platform, creating your image of you. So if you're a radio host, then you would want to create a LinkedIn profile that explains to people how you became a radio host, how your education helped with that, how your career has moved that way, and it would aim everybody towards that pinnacle of you're a radio host and you've got the credentials to back it up. So it's not your resume and it's not just some random words, but it actually should have a point, which is what are you trying to get hired as, or as a consultant, or how are you trying to get leads? So the very first thing you have to do is, of course, define that. What am I trying to do?
Let me ask you a question. One of the most interesting parts of LinkedIn is the headline right at the top of your profile. Most people just say like consultant or talk show host or business owner. Would you recommend a headline that is more of a call to action?
Well, a call to action is a good one. You've got to remember that as far as keywords are concerned, the headline is the most important thing in your profile. That is what the main thing that Google and Bing and all of the other search engines will run off of, including LinkedIn search engine, is those keywords will have weight over anything else. The assumption is if it's in your headline, it's the most important. So one thing to do, a lot of people just put their title. Let's put your title and put a little character, like a star or a dash or something, and then a couple keywords, and then maybe a quick call to action like call me or whatever, so you can combine them all together. I have ghostwriter in my headline, and I wind up on number 3 on searches of ghostwriter most of the time. It changes all the time, so sometimes I'm not, sometimes I am. But that's just because I have that keyword there and sprinkled throughout the rest of the profile.
Do you recommend using your keywords more than just in your profile, like up and down your profile?
Well, when you start making your LinkedIn profile, first thing you do is you define who your target audience is and what you're trying to do. The second thing you do is you come up with a list of phrases and keywords that help promote that. So me as a ghostwriter, ghostwriter, best-selling author, technical writer, and so forth. Those might be key phrases, and then I would sprinkle them through naturally. They have to be natural. So you don't want to keyword stuff. You don't want to say ghostwriter, comma, ghostwriting, comma. You don't want to do that. What I do is you're writing an essay, basically, in your summary, and you just put the keywords in there when they make sense. keeping in mind that the ones closer to the front are more important to search engines. So your first sentence should have your most important keyword repeated. So your headline might have ghostwriter, your first sentence of your summary might have ghostwriter, and then your first experience might be your current position, and it should have ghostwriter in there, both in the title and in the experience. And then you might do the same in your schooling. And Google and Bing will get the idea that, hey, this guy's a ghostwriter. I'm going to push him up the ranking. Now, if you do it too much, then they're going to say, oh, boy, this guy's trying to spam me, and they're going to push you down the rankings. So it's kind of a borderline. It's kind of you're on the fence thing.
You know, you mentioned a good point. You talk about spamming. When you want to connect with people for the first time, you know, sometimes either people will connect with me naturally, or I'll go into a specific group of people that I want to connect with. What's the best way for the first message to get the ball rolling without sounding too pushy or too salesy or writing a term paper, because most people aren't interested in everything you do? But what's the best way to just start the relationship going? What type of message would you send out to someone for the first time?
Well, it depends on where I've connected with them at. If I've connected with them in a group on LinkedIn or I'm run across them in some other way, I would just send a message explaining how we met and why I'm interested in them, and keep it short, 1 or 2 sentences. You know, I saw in the group that you talked about ghostwriting, and I'm a ghostwriter, and you know, maybe we should chat. Maybe we should connect or something like that. Or I thought it'd be useful we connect because we could share a common interest. Don't put in the typical buy my stuff messages, because that is spam, and that you'll just get deleted. I know I almost automatically delete those. Hey, we just connected. Thank you. By the way, you should reach out to me so I can sell you my stuff. I'm like, delete. Immediate. Just, because I'm not going to buy your stuff. If you're going to think of it as you're walking around on a trade floor or in a convention or in a classroom or something, and the first thing you're not going to do is shove your business card in somebody's face. You're not going to do that because that's rude. Well, why would you do it on LinkedIn? It's still rude.
No, it makes sense. As a matter of fact, one of the things I did, I had a lot of fun with, I did a test, is I would send out a message to someone that went like this: hi, my name is Joel Helfer. I'm from Windermere, Florida. It's 75 and sunny outside. How's the weather in your neck of the woods? Have a nice day. That was my whole message. And people would respond. It was kind of comical. Oh, I'm from Pittsburgh. It's 25 and it's freezing here. I'd rather be in Florida. But most people responded to a message like that, which then gave me an opportunity to add a little bit more about what I did.
Yeah.
How do you like that? Do you think that's worthwhile?
That can have a good effect. It's better than saying, I'm Joel, can you buy my products? or get my consulting service, or buy my book, or whatever. It's certainly a better approach. You could actually think of it if you're going on a date, and you're not going on a date, but you're meeting somebody for the first time. Are you going to use some cheesy pickup line? And that's not a cheesy one, by the way. I'm not implying that. Or are you going to have a natural thing? I might naturally talk to somebody saying, what do you think of the weather? That might be a natural conversation opener. And you can think of it that way. How would you open a conversation with a real person in a public place? I would just talk to them. I would just do exactly what you just did. Maybe not the weather, maybe something else. Maybe I noticed on your profile that you own a leather factory, and that sounds fascinating to me. Maybe we and proceed from there, or something like that.
And how many messages would you go back and forth before you would try to promote whatever you're trying to offer?
I wouldn't promote whatever I'm trying to offer unless there was a natural point at which it came up. So if I was having a conversation with somebody and there was never a point in that conversation where it's all right for me to say, oh, and by the way, I'm selling brushes, then I wouldn't do it on LinkedIn. It's the same thing.
You just build a relationship and then try to either get them offline or send them an email or maybe talk to them on the phone or something like that.
Try and get them on the phone. The first thing you're trying to do is just establish some commonality, and break the ice. It's the same as talking with anybody. My name is Richard, and I'm a ghostwriter. I love writing books. I really do. I like helping people. What do you do? And get them to open up. Let them talk more than you talk is a general rule. And I interviewed a guy named Ron Susanik. He was one of the founders of BNI, which is a networking group nationwide. It's the largest networking group in the United States. And he told me it's always about what you can do for somebody else. It's never about what they can do for you. So when you open the conversation, your first words should hover around, how can I help you? And what can I do for you? Is there anything I can help with? Don't do it so that you're annoying, but do it honestly, with absolutely no thought of getting anything back. Sometimes they'll come back and say, well, you're a writer. Do you know anybody who can proofread my book? And I might hook them up with somebody who can proofread their book. Or do you know anybody who, or do you do this or do you do that? I can do that. And you just talk about it, or maybe there's nothing you can do for them, and that's fine. But that is a real icebreaker in networking, is when you're willing to do something for somebody else. And it starts the relationship off on the right foot. And then eventually it comes back to you. And it may not come back from that person. It may come back from somebody he recommends you to, or somebody they recommend you to, and so on. It was a very interesting interview.
Do you see that goes across other social media platforms with the same approach, not just on LinkedIn, but on Facebook and other social media platforms as well?
In fact, I'm starting a probably the rest of my lifetime social media campaign on Facebook, Google+, YouTube, LinkedIn, and so forth for my books. And one of the first things I'm doing is asking people how I can help them and relating stories about how this book became to be written, or how that book came to be written, or what it means to me, or how it helps somebody. So testimonials. I just received this glowing testimonial from somebody on one of my books that I republished. One of my books is How to Be Friends with Women, and she read it and just went, she's got to show it to all of her ex-boyfriends and stuff, because it's exactly what they should be doing, and she loves it, and blah 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 blah. Just went on and on and on. I was like, wow, that was good. And mostly what you're doing is being social. It's called social media. It's not called advertising media. It's not called promotion media, and it's not called marketing media. So LinkedIn is a business social media network. So instead of doing what everybody else is doing and pumping out ads and trying to come up with the best way to get people to buy your book, just be honest and social. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to form relationships, and then somebody, in my case, is going to say, hey, you just mentioned this lady had this big win with your book. Maybe that might help me. Or you wrote a book about LinkedIn, you said. Maybe my LinkedIn is awful. Maybe you can consult with me and help my LinkedIn be better, and so forth. And it just grows that way. And you've got a much firmer relationship than the buy my book or buy my product. Now, if you're a big company like McDonald's or one of the large companies, you can afford to just spit out there, buy my stuff. But if you're a little guy like most of us, you can't afford the time to do that, and you can't afford to buy the ads. And I don't know about you, and I certainly am not buying Google ads because they're expensive for books.
Yeah, what I do is I find the best way to connect with people is what we're doing now. That's what I love to do, is to get people on the radio and just have a conversation and learn about them. That's my thing. Yep. Let me ask you another question, which is really related to this. Is you're also a computer expert who, for a long period of your time, worked with computer companies, and today the big trend is to protect your information from hackers, and it's even gone all the way up to the highest levels of government. And what do you do today to protect your information so people don't steal it?
Well, the first thing you do is you have to recognize that it doesn't matter what kind of computing resources you have, they're not safe. So you've got computing resources all over your house. If you're a typical American now, lower to middle class, to upper middle class, you've got a car with a smart car now, and it's got information in it. You've got your computer, you've got your smartwatch, your smartphone, maybe a laptop, maybe a tablet, maybe a Kindle, maybe one of those little robot things. I got one of those little robot vacuums that are really cool. All of those things are computers, and all of them can be hacked. So how do you step back and you think, okay, they can be hacked, so how do I protect against it? Well, first of all, you buy my book and I'll tell you how to do it. But you put a firewall around it, which is basically a networking term for you put some protection in to protect your network. That's one of the first things you have to do. And then make sure things are kept up to date. All of these devices require updates. And understand where the vulnerabilities are. Let me give you an example of a privacy problem. Okay, I'm actually ghostwriting a book about this now. It's kind of cool. The Internet of Things. Your smart car is part of the Internet of Things. It's a thing that's smart. And it has a computer in it. And it's actually very smart. Now, that car has a GPS in it, and it knows everywhere you've gone.
Right.
It has a dash cam, and it's actually taking pictures of everywhere you're going. It has all kinds of other information, recording speed and traffic and timing and maybe even who's in the car. Now, that data is not stored in the car. It's stored on a computer somewhere in the United States, somewhere else. Maybe Amazon, maybe IBM's computers, who knows? All right, who owns that information? Do you own it? Say if it's on Amazon's computers, does Amazon own it? Does the car manufacturer own it? And if the cops need to get to it, do they need a warrant? Because it's not on your premises. These are interesting questions that the Internet of Things is bringing to mind. Who owns that data? If you have a smart alarm in your house and the information from the alarm, like who's entered your house, is not stored in your house, but it's stored on a computer in Wyoming, if I'm a cop, do I need a warrant to get to that information? Yes or no? The law doesn't really say. It's not concrete yet. And if the information is stored out of the country, which it sometimes is, it becomes even more sticky. So knowing that, how much you want to make sure that you're careful perhaps might make you more careful about where you drive, because you basically could be spied on at any point in time. Even more interesting on the Internet of Things, wow. The officers can actually stop that car. So if you're in a car chase, the officer could push the button, grab control of your car, and bring it to a stop, theoretically. So they could actually take control of the car, especially in these newer autonomous cars, the Google self-driving ones and things. Somebody can just take it over. All of these things become vulnerabilities, and all of these are things that perhaps you want to think about. On a lower level, keep your system patched. That means make sure you put in the updates. Put in a firewall and make around your whole network, not just your computer, because your smartwatch and all your other things plug into your network. Those will be in your router.
When you mean firewall, do you mean like an antivirus program like Panda or something like that?
Well, that's another thing you want to have. When you attach your computer to the internet, you get a box from your cable company that lets you connect to the cable company. What you do is you go to Amazon or go to the store and you buy what's called a router, and you put it between that cable box and your computer, and that router will have a firewall in it. And that firewall is an electronic fence, basically. It puts a fence around your network that says nobody can come in here unless I let them. And it's on as soon as you turn it on. In most cases, if you bought a Netgear or something, it'll be turned on automatically. So all you need to do is install it.
Oh, I see. Yeah, we've got a couple of those in the house.
Right. And that will help prevent people from getting into your network, because your network has what you got from your cable vendor has what's called a wireless network, and you're probably attaching to it with your smartwatch, your smartphone, blah, blah, blah. Well, all of those things might be vulnerable to the internet unless that cable box has a firewall in it. Most of them do. But anyway, you have to think beyond your computer. You have a lot of computers, so you have to protect them all, and you want to keep everybody out of them. If your computer starts running slow, that probably means you have a virus, or possibly means you have a virus. So you need to get an expert in there from, Geek Squad or one of the other places perhaps, and have them look at it or run the antivirus software or whatever is appropriate. System slowdowns are typically either caused because you've installed too much junk or you've got a virus of some kind. And you don't want a virus on your computer. That means people can spy into your finances. They can look at what you're doing. They can record everything you watch. They can do all kinds of nasty things, and you don't want that. So if you have even a glimmering of a thought that there might be somebody in there, get it fixed.
Yeah, I had that with my computer and I had it fixed where one day I was looking at my screen and like a little black square pops up on the screen with a whole bunch of funny writing for about 10 seconds, and then it disappeared. and it was coming up about 2-3 times over a period of a week or two, and I realized somebody's looking at what I'm doing.
Yep, that's command level stuff. They're controlling your computer from very low down underneath the covers. Unfortunately for them, that window comes up and it can be a tip-off. Anyway,
so that's the future. That's the future of information. You pretty much don't have any privacy anymore, is what you're telling me.
Basically, the Internet of Things is going to obviate privacy or change the way that it works, and it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It's what's going to happen. I'm getting really deep into it in the book I'm ghostwriting, and wow, the world is changing, and we're not talking 10, 20 years from now. We're talking 6 months, a year from now kind of time frame.
I read somewhere that they said every 6 months or every year the amount of information available on the Internet doubles. And when I read that statistic, I go, how do you possibly keep up with it all?
You read fast. Kidding.
You've been talking a little bit about writing and ghostwriting, and tell us a little bit about why you believe that every business needs a book.
Well, every business needs to be branded. So they have an image that they're trying to portray, especially smaller businesses. And my image is as a ghostwriter and as a professional author. Your image might be as a radio host. Somebody else might be as a apartment manager. A book I ghostwrote was for apartment manager. And what a book does is it really lends credibility to you. I mean, not everybody in the world can write a book. In fact, it's a very small percentage. So if you've written a book, quote, quote, even though you had it ghostwritten, nobody knows that unless you tell them. And you have it sitting on you behind the shelf. It's a nice paperback. It's got your name on the front cover. It's got pretty pictures inside. It's got some text that makes sense and explains what you do. You have instant credibility. I mean, when I walk into somebody's office, I walked into somebody's office recently, and he's a speaker and tells you how to dress for success. Basically, he follows that model. And he has a book. And he had that book sitting, and I was like, whoa, you've got a book. And instantly I was impressed because, I mean, I've written books. I know how hard it is. And it was actually a thick book with pictures in it, and it was very, very detailed on how to dress and how to maintain your image so that you look good when you're up speaking and stuff like that. I had no doubt that he knew what he was talking about. I mean, the book could have been gobbledygook for all I know, but because I didn't read it. But just looking at it, just looking at the cover was like, wow, geez, this guy must know what he's talking about. Whereas if he didn't have that book, I would immediately be suspicious, perhaps, because he's trying to get my money for his courses. And it would have been a different relationship. But it immediately made me comfortable. He knows what he's talking about. He wrote a book.
And I know we've done the same thing with people who've even written chapters in a multi-author book, and it had the same effect. They didn't even have to write the entire book. They just wrote a chapter. And because they were part of a book on the same subject that had the same effect, would you say that's as good, or are they better off having their own individual book?
I've seen some of those multi-author things. I've never actually been in one. I would say it's better to have your own book, but failing that, being in a multi-author one certainly can't hurt. It certainly is a lot less work. Somebody I knew did one of those. He funded it, and everybody chipped in $100, and there were like 50 authors, and it got published, and it was kind of cool. I don't know what it did for those authors other than they could say they were published, but it's very different to have a book with your name on it, maybe even a whole bookshelf full of that same book with your name on it behind you when you're sitting there talking to somebody. It just makes the person sitting there looking at those books think, wow, this guy, he's important. He wrote a book. And then you maybe see a second one that he's written on the similar subject. He's written 2 books. He must really know what he's talking about. Like I wrote a book on survival, and then I wrote a book on evacuation bags that are used in survival, and I could put those 2 together. You better believe that if I walk in trying to sell myself in that arena, I would have those books with me, and having 2 of them is even better.
You actually hand them to somebody.
Yeah, I've got 8 business books, and that certainly helps with getting business and so forth. It lends a lot of credibility, and people have respect for authors, even after the thing with Donald Trump and his ghostwriter.
When you ghostwrite a book for someone, tell me about the process. How do you get the information and the content to write the book, or do you just write the book and then the person reviews it and then accepts whatever you write? How does that actually work to make it personal?
Oh, I wish number 2 was the way it worked, because that would be easy. No, the way it normally works is you do an initial interview, you create an outline, and then you interview for each chapter, maybe do some research depending on the technical nature of the subject, and then write it. What I like to do is have them review each chapter as I go. So if I was doing a book for you, let's say 8 chapters on how to be a radio host and how to set up a radio station or something like that, we would spend a lot of time on chapter 1 and 2 to make sure that I was doing the right things. And you review each chapter as I went. So I'd finish one chapter, probably 2,000-3,000 words, send it to you, you'd review it, you'd send it back to me. You go back and forth a couple times, and then you say, then I'd say, you think it's done? Yep, it's done. And then we move on to the next one. That way we don't get all the way through the book, and then you say, ew, which is the ghostwriter's nightmare, because then we have to go into the revision cycle, which can be very demanding.
So what's the process from start to finish? It sounds like it takes quite a while to ghostwrite a book for someone.
The one that I mentioned that I'm ghostwriting now has taken about 9 months, and we're almost done with it. We're going to probably publish it in March. I'm also the publisher on that. I have a little publishing company, so I'll be publishing that too. And the process is, of course, the initial contact. You write up a little contract. The first question out of their mouth is almost always going to be how much, and you haven't even done a single interview yet, and how would I know how much? I mean, I don't even know what you want yet, but you do enough of interviews where you can come up with a number. Generally, it's going to be for a reasonably sized book. It's going to be starting at $10,000, and it's probably going to go. It could go all the way up to 50, depending on how many pages and the complexity of the book. And then you settle on a price, you sign a contract, you come up with an outline, the person will okay the outline. You might have to refine the quote at that point. It might go lower, it might go higher. The contract needs to state that. Then you proceed forward and you write each chapter one at a time and get them reviewed one at a time. And then you get to the end, and then the inevitable, my mother read it and she didn't like the way this read. And then that's where you better have your contract, if you're a ghostwriter, good enough to be able to say, okay, good, we can revise it all you want, but it costs more. Because otherwise you get into the infinite revision phase, and that can be a nightmare for both sides. That's why you want to revise them as you go, rather than at the end. So
you do one chapter at a time, and you get approval to go to the next chapter.
Yeah, I found that's the best way to do it. Because then when you get to the end, you've got a product that's probably, or a book that's probably 95% done. You'll have to revise it again, because then you're going to go through and but you're fixing small things at that point. Because he's already approved the 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 chapters of the book. He's already read them. He's already approved them. He's already changed them. At that point, it's really hard to argue. I didn't know what I was getting, or et cetera, et cetera. He can't say that.
Tell me a little bit about, Richard, how you market yourself, because one of the things that the audiences that we have on the show like to listen to is, how do you promote yourself, whatever you do? How do you market yourself as a ghostwriter to actually get contracts to write books for people? What do you do?
Well, as it turns out, that's an interesting question, because I'm marketing myself as a best-selling author. I'm marketing all my books. I'm also marketing myself as a ghostwriter. So those are three completely different areas, and they are totally different. And I'm writing a book now about how to create a career as a best-selling self-published author. So I'm writing about how to promote yourself as an author. But as a ghostwriter, it turns out that it is much easier to sell freelancing and ghostwriting and make money at it than it is to make money as a self-published author. Ghostwriting, to promote yourself, is basically finding the right contacts, making those contacts, and starting relationships with them until they trust you enough where they want to talk to you about their book.
Uh-huh.
So for this one I'm doing on the Internet of Things, he and I had a lot of conversations. We met online. He found my Facebook profile, my LinkedIn profile.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a bit. He came to trust me, and then he finally signed on the dotted line. Now he really trusts me enough. He wants to do 2 more books. It's kind of cool.
Oh, so now we're doing a little library for him, which is good, huh?
Yeah. Well, he's fairly big in his industry, and he wants to brand himself, and that's always good news for a ghostwriter. Ghostwriting, if you can network effectively, is relatively easy to find customers. The problem is finding customers who will pay the rate that you need to have. And ghostwriting is not cheap if it's good. You can, of course, go out onto all of these what do you call them, chop shops on the web, what are they called?
Fiverr and places like that.
Fiverr and Thumbtack and so forth. And you can find ghostwriters who will write you whole books for pennies on the dollar. And you're going to get junk. You're going to get somebody from some other country who doesn't speak English. I mean, they're great people and stuff, but they're not native English speakers. They don't understand the audience here in the United States. You're going to get back something that's basically garbage, and you're going to pay a few $100 or $1,000 for it. That's not what you want. What you want is a good book that brands you and makes you look good. And if you want that, you're going to pay for it. And you should be willing to pay for it. I mean, you'd be willing to pay for a car or an office space or supplies or promotion, then you should be willing to pay for a book. And if you aren't, then you've got the wrong mindset. And a well-written, let's say 50 to 75 page book is going to cost you about $10,000 starting. A longer than that's going to cost more. And that's what you need to walk in thinking, yeah, that's what it's going to cost. And that's well written without a lot of research and without a lot of interviews, because all those things cost money. So what a ghostwriter needs to do to break into the business is start making contacts and start networking and just reaching out and talking to people, finding out what they're doing, and then just talking to them. And they know he's a ghostwriter because he said so up front. And eventually the subject comes around, well, I've always had this book I've wanted to write. Well, why don't you? Well, I don't know how to write. Or I don't know if there's a market for it, or I don't know, whatever he says, you just address it and move beyond that. But it's a lot easier for me to sell ghostwriting than it is to sell self-published books. It's a whole different ballgame.
That's very interesting, because there's such a trend now with self-published books where, everybody wants to create a 30, 40, 50, 60-page book on Amazon. And they start out with the 99-cent deal to become a best-selling author. And I've actually purchased some of these books, and most of them aren't that good.
Well, you actually said 2 things there that are vital in that conversation. Everybody, and they aren't that good. And that's the problem, is everybody can now publish a book, which is great. I mean, talk about democracy at work. Right. You want to make a book, you write it and you publish it. Now, everybody's doing that, so how do you make your book stand above everybody else's? And that's what the book I'm writing now, which will be available in February, it will be about, is how do you make a book that actually sells, and then you make another book and another book and another book, and keep pumping these books out as a self-published author until you have a career at it, which is what I'm doing. How do you do that? And one of the keywords is quality. You have to write a book that, first of all, would you want to read it? You, the writer, would you want to read it? And second of all, would your friends like to read it? And assuming you could get honest answers from them. And what about strangers? And so forth. You have to write a book that other people want to read.
Well, one of the most interesting things someone told me the other day, we were chatting on a different interview, and we were talking about stories. And I was in the construction business, and I've got some really hilarious stories. It's just the nature of the occupation, what goes on when you build a building. And someone says that the stories you tell are so funny, you should write a book.
If you were going to hire me to ghostwrite a book, we would start from those. We would, let's say you wrote 10 chapters of a book, 50, 75 pages. We would take your funny stories, and we would write a book around them. And each chapter would start from a funny story, and then the funny story would break down into
the lessons from it.
The lessons that you learned from that story. When I wrote the book for the apartment manager, and one of the funny stories was, bed bugs. Bed bugs is the bugaboo of all apartment managers, right?
Uh-huh.
No pun intended. And he had a lot of funny stories about bed bugs. They weren't funny at the time, but they're certainly funny looking 20 years later. And the chapter about bed bugs started with a funny story about bed bugs, and then went into how to solve them and what you need to do about them and so forth.
So that sounds like a good tip for everybody listening, that the way to start out each chapter is with a story or something that's relating to what you want to say, rather than just like hard information like you'd hear at a lecture at a university or a high school classroom or something. Does that make sense to you?
Well, yeah, I'm also a public speaker, and that's exactly the way I'm a member of a group called Toastmasters. That's exactly the way it's recommended to start your speech, is with a story, a personal story or a funny story. Whether or not it's related to what you're going to talk about in depth is fine, but you want to start off with something to relax everybody and make them laugh and get them looking at you and know, okay, this guy, he's talking to us and he's not just shoving his product down our throat. And starting off with, it doesn't have to be funny. It can just be a personal story.
Just interesting.
It could be some interesting story or a meaningful story or something like that. You still there?
The nature of today is, how do you tie it all together? The question I have is how do you take social media and marketing and creating credibility and authority by writing a book and put it together into a organized approach to get someone to do business with you? That's one of my biggest questions, because there's so many different ways of doing it. How do you put it all together into a system that makes sense, that doesn't just make people think you're just spamming them? How do you do that?
You talk to them rather than at them. So you talk to people in your social media and in your book and in everything else that you've got. You remember that there's a person there. It's not a faceless computer you're talking to. It's not a selling machine. It's not somebody who takes your orders or commands. It's not somebody you're putting subliminal thoughts into. It's a real life person with real life feelings and real life emotions. And if you remember that, and you put your social media campaign around the fact that there are actually people there. Well, what do people want? That's the question you could ask yourself. What do people want? Well, people like stories. They like personal things. They like a little tragedy, maybe a little funniness, a little joy. They like all that personal stuff. Well, all that stuff could be great in a social media campaign from a small business. You're a printing business. You could get a testimonial from somebody how your printing was wonderful and how it helped save their business. Or Maybe you have a funny story from the past about a different printing company that did it wrong. And, of course, you don't name them, but they printed stuff up that was a complete disaster. Or another story about how you were able to deliver in spite of the floods coming, or whatever. I mean, I don't know. Whatever it is, you're talking to people then. And then when they respond on your social media, you have to respond back. And you respond back as if you were talking to a person. Even though you're talking to a computer screen, you're actually talking to a person on the other end.
Right.
We forget that with the internet. And people get vicious on the internet because they forget that there are people on the other side of that computer screen. And that's what you have to do, is you have to tailor your social media around people, not around computers.
I know, because it's too easy to get wrapped up into the technology of it all, because I remember the day when there was only two ways to do business, Richard. Either you met someone in person, or you called them on the phone, or maybe you had to have a pocket full of change and go to a telephone booth and call them from a telephone booth. That was it. There was nothing. And business is so much better and so much easier, actually, because you actually had to build real relationships face-to-face with people in order to do business. And now everything, it just seems so impersonal to me. I just don't see how it all works well, because when I do it on a personal basis, it works so, like you're talking about, works so much better, because now I know with the kids, picking up the phone is like a lost art, but if you want something and you text them, they'll answer you.
Well, yeah, but even then, you want to make it personal. You want to make it about people. And you'll notice, if you look at the statistics, one reason why there are so many advertisements around now, whether in everywhere, is they're not working. The buy rate for ads, it's called a conversion rate, is amazingly low, under 1%. Actually, it's way less than 1%. So you have to inundate people with advertisements to get them to respond at all. Well, maybe they're doing it wrong. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they're doing it wrong. Now, I'm not an expert on that by any means, but it seems to me that if your conversion rate is 2.2% and you're pumping millions of dollars in an advertising campaign, maybe you're doing something wrong. And I think what the wrong is you're not talking to people. You're just blasting out a message. And yes, I mean, eventually people are it's going to get through their thick skulls, but maybe it'd be better to talk to them.
Well, that's interesting, because when you look at Facebook, for example, which I don't spend a lot of time on, but what people respond to is personal issues, like somebody got married or somebody got sick or, God forbid, somebody passed away. And those get all kinds of comments and responses. But when you're on there trying to promote something or push yourself, nobody pays any attention to it. So I guess that's pretty much what you're saying, is you got to be more. I know, like one day, a few years ago, I had a health issue, and I ended up being in a nursing home for 100 days, which is no fun. And just to get it out of my system, I wrote this story on Facebook. I really wasn't expecting any response at all. I just wanted to get it out of my system, right? Well, I must have got like 150 comments. I almost shot.
Oh, yeah.
I almost fell off the chair. And everybody was wishing me well, and even months later, people now want to know how I'm feeling and everything else, all from this story, which had nothing to do with other than my personal health situation, and I wasn't trying to promote it, sell it, get any response or anything. I just did it for my own, amusement. And it just showed me that was the biggest response I ever got on Facebook at all. And it had nothing to do with business or anything. It was just a story.
Exactly. And that's the point, is you got to market to people. And you have to be genuine. Anyway.
I think a lot of people have forgotten that, Just in summary, what do you feel is probably your most effective way of being genuine to people? Do you like social media or books or marketing or advertisements? What do you prefer? What do you think works the best for you?
Well, I'm in the process of putting together a social media campaign for my books. I've published 56 books, and by the end of this year, I'll probably have 200. And how do you promote that many books? Well, what you do is you get in conversations with people and talk to them and start building up relationships so that they understand who you are, what you're doing, and why you're writing books and why you might help them. they begin to trust you. And it's all about know, like, and trust. That's something that one of my friends, he's a major networker in Florida called Mark O'Donnell, and he runs RGA Networks. And he said you have to know, like, and trust people. People have to know, like, and trust you in order to buy from you. They have to know you, they have to like you, and they have to trust you. And that's what your social media campaign needs to be aimed for. And I've been finding social media as my number one way to get to people. Social media being Facebook, YouTube, Google Plus to a lesser extent. I haven't really figured out Twitter yet. I probably will. People seem to like Twitter. I just haven't figured it out. Instagram, Pinterest, all of these things help build that know, like, and trust. And if they know, like, and trust you, they're going to do business with you. And if they don't trust you, they don't like you, or they don't know you, they're not going to do business with you most likely. And that's what social media is very good at if you play it right.
Well,
go ahead. For me, throwing out an advertisement, an ad that says, buy my book, well, nobody knows me. Nobody likes me. They don't know me enough to like me. They don't trust me because they don't know me. So nobody buys it. But if I put out, like I've got a coloring book about a dragon coloring book that I just came out with. So I'm going to put out little stories about dragons and how dragons work, and dragons are smart, and dragons do this, and dragons do that. And that's going to build up more of a know, like, and trust factor. And they're going to enjoy the stories, and they're going to enjoy the things, and then there'll be a coloring book, and okay, let's get the coloring book. The idea is I'm building up a relationship with people instead of trying to shove my coloring book down their throat. It takes longer, but it's far more effective.
And more lasting. If just to wrap this up, Richard, if people want to get a hold of you for all your different expertises and ghostwriting and computer analysis, how do they get a hold of you? What do they do to get you?
Well, two things they can do. First of all, if they're interested in my books, they could go to coolauthor.com. It's spelled exactly like that, COOL author.com.
I like that.
And that goes directly to my Amazon book page, and they can see all the books that I've written. And then if they want to get hold of me, thewritingking.com. Put the in front of it, thewritingking.com, or thecoloringking.com, because I have a coloring book company also. So you could go to either one of those, and you could check out my books. You could send me an email from there. You could read stories that I've written, whatever you want to do.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you dubbed yourself, did you dub yourself the Writing King, or did somebody give you that title?
I dubbed myself the Writing King, the Coloring King, and the eBay King. I've got that one also, because I sell on eBay also. It's kind of my brand is that King is, I'm very confident. It's a premium brand. Hence the King part of it. It's regal, and that's what I'm trying to portray is confidence and premium.
Well, thank you very much. I wish you well and continued success in all of your endeavors and your book publishing and your computer business and your different careers. You're a very interesting man, and I know that the people have enjoyed listening to you, and I wish you well. Thank you very much for being on the show, Richard.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
You have a good day, and like we always end the Main Street Mavericks Radio, have a little fun today. Don't save it up. This is Joel Helfer. Have a nice day.
You've been listening to Main Street Mavericks Radio with Joel Helfer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit mainstreetmavericks.com.